My dad sent a group text. Don't bother showing up if you can't act grateful. I didn't reply, just opened my laptop and canceled the tuition payments for both my siblings. 3 days later, they were screaming in my voicemail while I was on a beach, watching the sunset. I, 29M, learned that respect works both ways when my family took my generosity for granted one too many times. The notification popped up while I was reviewing quarterly reports at my tech startup. Dad's name at the top of a group text that included my 2 younger siblings. The message made my stomach clench with familiar frustration. Don't bother showing up if you can't act grateful. I stared at my phone screen, watching the typing indicators appear and disappear as my brother and sister crafted their responses. They were probably scrambling to smooth things over, as usual, but I didn't type anything back. Instead, I set the phone down and opened my laptop. The family dynamics had been deteriorating for months. Ever since Mom passed 2 years ago, Dad had appointed himself the family patriarch with an iron fist. Every gathering became a performance where we had to demonstrate the proper level of appreciation for his wisdom and sacrifice. Last weekend's incident was just the final straw. I had driven 4 hours to attend my cousin's wedding, bringing an expensive gift and genuinely looking forward to seeing everyone. But when Dad started his usual lecture about how ungrateful our generation was, I made the mistake of mentioning that I'd been working 16-hour days to keep my company afloat. He interpreted this as complaining and launched into a tirade about how I thought I was better than everyone else. My siblings sat there in silence while he berated me in front of the entire extended family. When I finally excused myself and left early, apparently that was the ultimate sign of disrespect. Now, staring at that group text, something inside me snapped. For the past 5 years, since my software company started turning real profit, I had been quietly paying for my siblings' education. My brother was in his 3rd year of law school, and my sister was pursuing her master's in architecture. Neither of them knew the money came from me. Dad had taken credit for finding a way to cover their expenses, and I had let him maintain that fiction to keep peace in the family. I logged into my bank's website and navigated to the automatic payment section. 2 recurring transfers, each for several $1,000s per semester. My finger hovered over the cancel button for a long moment. The decision crystallized when I remembered how they had both laughed along with Dad's criticisms last weekend. How neither of them had texted me afterward to check if I was okay. How they treated my presence at family events as expected rather than appreciated, despite my busy schedule and the long drives involved. I clicked cancel on both payments. The confirmation messages appeared on my screen with bureaucratic finality. Effective immediately, no more tuition payments. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my office chair, feeling an unexpected sense of lightness. My phone buzzed with responses to the group text. Both siblings were performing their usual damage control, suggesting maybe we could all talk things through at Sunday dinner. Dad was doubling down, explaining how he wouldn't tolerate disrespectful children regardless of their age. I grabbed my phone and walked out of the office, telling my assistant I'd be unreachable for the next week. The flight to Costa Rica left that evening. I had been planning this vacation for months, but kept postponing it due to work obligations. Now seemed like the perfect time to finally take that break. The beach house I rented sat right on the water, isolated enough that the only sounds were waves and occasional bird calls. I spent the first 2 days completely offline, swimming, reading, and trying to remember what relaxation felt like. On the 3rd morning, I finally powered on my phone to check for any genuine emergencies. The voicemail notifications covered half the screen. 17 missed calls from my brother, 12 from my sister, and surprisingly, none from Dad. I poured coffee and settled into a beach chair to listen to the messages. The first few were confused. My brother wondering why his tuition payment had been declined. My sister asking if there was some kind of banking error. They both assumed it was a technical glitch that would be resolved quickly. By the middle messages, panic had set in. The university financial offices had been clear about the consequences of non-payment. Both of them were facing immediate enrollment suspension unless the outstanding balances were settled within days. The final messages were desperate. My brother's voice cracked as he explained how losing his final year of law school would derail everything he had worked toward. My sister was crying, asking how they were supposed to come up with that kind of money when they had planned their entire lives around the assumption that tuition was covered. I sipped my coffee and watched pelicans dive for fish in the crystal clear water. The next batch of voicemails revealed that they had finally connected the dots. My brother had called the bank to inquire about the canceled payments and learned they had originated from my account. Both siblings were now oscillating between apologies and demands for explanation. My sister's voice was particularly grating as she insisted I couldn't just abandon family over a stupid argument. She pointed out how much they needed this support and how unfair it was to punish them for Dad's behavior. I deleted the voicemails and opened my laptop to check my company's stock price. We were up 12% from last month. That afternoon, my phone rang with a call from my uncle. Dad's brother had always been the family mediator, and apparently, he had been drafted into service. He started by asking about my well-being and mentioning how beautiful Costa Rica must be this time of year. Subtle inquiry about my location noted and filed away. He eventually worked around to the main topic. The family was in crisis mode. My siblings were facing academic disaster, and Dad was furious about being embarrassed when he couldn't make good on his promises to cover their education. My uncle wondered if there might be some way to work things out. I told him I was taking time to think about family priorities and would be in touch when I returned. His frustrated sigh carried clearly through the international connection. The sunset that evening was spectacular. Orange and pink light reflected off the water while I sat on my private deck, eating fresh-caught fish and drinking wine that cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. My phone continued buzzing with incoming calls, but I had switched it to silent mode. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely peaceful. Update 1. I extended my vacation by another week. The Costa Rican beach house was perfect for thinking through complex problems, and this situation definitely qualified as complex. More voicemails accumulated daily. My siblings had apparently enlisted other family members in their campaign. Cousins, aunts, and even family friends were calling to express concern about the misunderstanding that was threatening to destroy two promising academic careers. The most interesting call came from my grandmother. At 83, she had always been the family straight shooter who refused to participate in drama. She told me she knew exactly what I had done and why I had done it. She also mentioned that she had been wondering for years how Dad could afford those tuition payments on his salary. She didn't ask me to change my mind. Instead, she told me a story about her own father, who had worked himself into an early grave trying to please people who never appreciated his sacrifices. The conversation ended with her suggesting that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is to let them learn about consequences. My brother's messages were becoming increasingly frantic. Law school placement was highly competitive, and losing his spot in the final year would mean starting over completely at a different institution, if any would accept him. The financial implications were staggering, but more importantly, his entire career timeline was now in jeopardy. My sister's approach was different. She had always been the family diplomat, and her messages focused on emotional appeals. She talked about Mom's memory and how disappointed she would be to see the family falling apart. She reminded me of childhood moments when we had been close and promised that things could go back to the way they were before. Neither of them acknowledged the fundamental issue: the years of taking my contributions for granted while allowing Dad to claim credit and dictate terms. I spent my days snorkeling and my evenings researching family psychology. The concept of emotional labor kept appearing in articles about dysfunctional family dynamics. The idea that some family members consistently give more than they receive, while others take that imbalance for granted as the natural order. Dad finally called on day 6 of my extended vacation. His message was predictably focused on disappointment and ingratitude. He couldn't understand how I could be so selfish as to punish innocent children for adult disagreements. He demanded that I fix the situation immediately and return home to discuss my behavior like a mature adult. The irony of receiving a lecture about maturity from someone who had thrown a public tantrum over perceived disrespect was not lost on me. Update 2. 2 weeks into my beach exile, the situation back home had escalated dramatically. My brother had been forced to withdraw from law school. His program wouldn't accept partial payment or extended deadlines, and he couldn't secure alternative funding quickly enough. 3 years of work and substantial debt, all leading to nothing. My sister had managed to negotiate a one-semester deferral by agreeing to a payment plan that would require her to work full-time while completing her graduate program. Her timeline had shifted from finishing next spring to potentially taking 2 additional years. Dad had apparently gone into crisis management mode, frantically trying to secure loans or find other family members willing to step in. The fact that his financial arrangements had been exposed as fraudulent was eating at him visibly, according to my uncle's updates. The family narrative was settling into a familiar pattern. I was the villain who had destroyed 2 lives over a petty grudge. The years of quiet support were being rewritten as manipulation and control. My departure during the wedding weekend was being characterized as a dramatic overreaction that had triggered this entire disaster. I found this revisionist history fascinating to observe from a distance. My phone rang while I was having dinner at a beachside restaurant. An unknown number with a local area code from back home. I answered out of curiosity. It was my brother's girlfriend, someone I had met maybe twice at family gatherings. She was calling to tell me exactly what she thought of my character and my actions. According to her, I had revealed myself to be a narcissistic control freak who couldn't handle the slightest criticism from family. She informed me that my brother was devastated and considering whether law was even the right path anymore. She wanted me to know that I had potentially destroyed the dreams of someone I claimed to love, all because my ego couldn't handle a single uncomfortable conversation. I listened to the entire 5-minute rant without interrupting, then thanked her for calling and hung up. The sunset that night was particularly beautiful. Update 3. 3 weeks in paradise had given me plenty of time to think about family, loyalty, and the difference between love and enabling. I finally decided to return home, but not before making one important stop. The law school admissions office was surprisingly accommodating when I explained the situation. My brother's academic record was excellent, and the circumstances of his withdrawal were unusual enough to warrant consideration. After reviewing his case and my offer to establish an emergency scholarship fund, they agreed to hold his place for 1 semester while alternative arrangements were made. I made similar arrangements with my sister's university. The architecture program was more flexible about payment schedules, but I established a fund there as well to ensure she could complete her degree without the financial stress. The key difference was that both funds were administered directly by the universities, with clear academic performance requirements and no involvement from any family members. I returned home on a Sunday afternoon and drove straight to Dad's house, where the traditional family dinner was presumably still happening. Everyone was there except me. The conversation stopped abruptly when I walked through the front door. My siblings looked like they had aged years in the past month. Dad's expression was unreadable. I told them about the scholarship arrangements I had made. Both universities had already been in contact, and my siblings could resume their studies immediately with full funding through graduation. The relief in the room was palpable, but I wasn't finished talking. I explained that the funds were contingent on maintaining good academic standing and had no connection to family dynamics or Dad's authority. I also made it clear that this was a one-time intervention, not a restoration of the previous arrangement. My brother asked if this meant everything could go back to normal now. I told him that normal had been unsustainable, which was why we were all sitting there having this conversation. Dad started to say something about family forgiveness and moving forward, but I held up my hand. I had spent 3 weeks thinking about what I wanted from my relationships with all of them. The answer was surprisingly simple: basic respect and acknowledgement of effort. Not gratitude performances or artificial hierarchy, just recognition that my contributions had value and my time had worth. If they could manage that baseline of mutual respect, then we could rebuild from there. If not, then they now had the resources to complete their educations and build independent lives without needing to involve me in family drama. My sister asked what would happen if they couldn't meet my expectations. I told her that wasn't the right question. The question was what kind of family relationships they actually wanted to have, and whether those relationships required anyone to diminish themselves to maintain artificial peace. I left my contact information with both universities' financial aid offices and told my siblings they could reach me directly if they had questions about their scholarship requirements. Then I went home to my own apartment, ordered Thai food, and watched the sunset from my balcony while planning my next vacation. The difference was that this time, I wouldn't need to cancel it for family obligations.